Welcome, listener, in the shadows. We bring stories into the light. Join me as we explore the encounters no one speaks of and the things that watch from the dark. You were never supposed to see this, but since you have, you might as well wear it. From the vaults of the shadows, a new collection of unsettling apparel and artifacts pulled straight from the stories that were never meant to surface. Soft, worn-in shirts and hoodies that feel like something you dug out of a locked trunk in an abandoned ranger station. This isn't just merch, it's evidence. The Hunter's Gift, written for my father. For Father's Day, the morning air was crisp, tinged with the scent of pine and damp earth. The sky was pale blue, just beginning to warm with the promise of a late spring day. I stood beside my dad at the edge of the shooting range he'd built years ago, nestled deep in the woods behind his house. A place, he said, was his sanctuary. He held the longbow in his hands like an extension of himself, the polished wood smooth and warm beneath his fingers. It was a beauty, handcrafted, perfectly balanced, its grains swirling like quiet water beneath the varnish. I'd watched him shoot 1,000 times, but today felt different. "Here," he said, handing me an arrow. His voice was calm, steady, but there was an intensity in his eyes I hadn't seen before. "Hold it like this. The bow guides your aim, but the arrow listens to your breath." I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. Father's Day wasn't just another day to him, it was a ritual. Years of passing down a craft, a way of being. We weren't just shooting at targets. We were tracing a lineage, threading through time. I knocked the arrow and pulled back the string, the bow bending beneath the tension like a silent breath held tight. I let go. The arrow sliced through the air and thudded precisely in the bull's. Dad's lips twitched in a rare smile. "Not bad." We spent the morning like that, arrow after arrow, the quiet thump of wood on target blending with the forest's murmurs. But beneath his practiced calm, I sensed something unspoken, a weight he carried alone. Later, as we packed up, I asked, "Dad, this bow, where did it come from? You never really talk about it." He hesitated, eyes flickering toward the trees. "It's special," he said slowly, "made by a woodsman long ago. They say the wood came from a sacred tree, one the forest itself watches over." I chuckled nervously. "Sounds like a story from a movie." He shook his head. "It's real. The bow, it's more than wood and string. It's a bond. Over the years, it's sharpened my instincts, made my shots nearly impossible to miss." I studied him, the lines around his eyes deepening. "But at what cost?" He didn't answer. That night, as the house grew quiet, I lay awake thinking about the bow's strange power. A soft tapping echoed from the woods beyond the window, like footsteps just out of sight. I told myself it was the wind, but the bow sat on the table beside me, its grain catching the moonlight like something alive. And somewhere in the shadows, something was watching. The next morning, I found Dad already at the range, his silhouette steady against the dawn's pale light. He was polishing the bow with slow, deliberate strokes, almost reverent. I hesitated, then sat on a fallen log nearby. "I can't stop thinking about what you said last night, about the bow being a bond." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a quiet weight. "It is. When I first held it, it was just wood and string. But over the years, I started noticing things, like the bow knew where the target would be before I did." I frowned. "That sounds impossible," he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's what I thought, until the first time I felt it, like the forest itself was guiding the arrow." I swallowed, unsure if I wanted to hear more. Dad continued, voice low and measured. "But it's not free. Every perfect shot feels like a promise I'm making, like I'm tethered tighter to this place, to something I can't see." He paused, tracing a finger over the bow's curve. "Sometimes at night, I hear whispers in the woods, like the trees are speaking in a language just out of reach. Have you ever tried to follow the whispers?" I asked. He laughed softly, but it was brittle. "No, some things are better left alone." We spent the day shooting in silence, but I noticed the way his hands sometimes trembled, how his eyes darted toward the treeline whenever a branch cracked or a bird cried out. As the sun dipped low, he finally said, "Tomorrow, I want you to try something." I looked up, surprised. He stood and handed me the bow. "This is your turn." That night, I lay in bed with the bow resting against the wall. The tapping returned, soft and slow, like cautious footsteps pacing just beyond the window. But this time I felt something else, a presence, watching, waiting, my breath caught. I wanted to believe it was just nerves, the weight of Dad's stories playing tricks. But deep inside, a quiet, cold thought settled. What if the bow isn't just a weapon? What if it's a key? The morning light filtered softly through the window as I rose, heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and something darker, unease. Dad's bow rested against the wall like a silent guardian, its polished wood gleaming almost unnaturally in the dawn. I approached it slowly, fingers trembling as I lifted the bow into my hands. It felt heavier than I expected, not in weight but in presence, like it carried centuries of quiet power. Outside, Dad waited at the range, his eyes sharp but cautious. "Ready?" he asked, voice steady but softer than usual. I nodded, stepping forward. He handed me an arrow, longer and smoother than any I'd held before. "Feel the weight. Breathe with it. The bow isn't just wood, it listens." I nocked the arrow, pulling back the string. The moment stretched, my breath slowed, the world around me softened, as if the forest itself leaned closer. I released. The arrow sailed true, striking a target deeper than I dared hope. Dad's gaze held something, awe, worry, pride, all tangled together. "Good," he said, "but it's more than skill." As the day wore on, something shifted. The birds around us fell silent. The wind stopped moving through the pines, and beneath the quiet, a low hum like a heartbeat in the earth. Later, as I inspected the bow, I saw it. Faint scratches etched into the wood, almost like runes. They hadn't been there before. A chill ran down my spine. Dad's voice broke the silence. "The bow chooses, it binds." I swallowed hard. "What does it want?" He looked away, his jaw clenched. "Balance, respect, and something more." That night, the whispers returned. But now I felt them inside my mind like a voice just beyond words. The bow was no longer just an heirloom. It was a living bond, and it was pulling me in. The forest had always been a place of solace for my dad, a refuge from the noise of the world. But now, standing beside him as shadows deepened, I began to understand the darker truth hidden beneath that peace. "The bond," he said one evening, voice low and grave, "it's not just about skill or precision. It's about giving a part of yourself, something you can never take back." I looked at him, confused, uneasy. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, eyes distant, as if recalling a memory too heavy to hold. "When you wield the bow, you're not just shooting arrows. You're trading pieces of your soul. Every perfect shot, every whisper you hear in the woods, it's a price paid in parts of your humanity." I swallowed hard. He continued, "The bow connects you to the forest's ancient spirit. It sharpens your instincts, yes, but it also demands respect, and sometimes it demands sacrifice." "Sacrifice," I echoed, dread pooling in my stomach. Dad nodded slowly. "Not always death. Sometimes it's a memory, a feeling, a part of your past that fades away. Your connection to the world as you knew it slips bit by bit. The more you bond with the bow, the less you belong outside the woods." He looked at me, his eyes shadowed but fierce. "If you let it claim too much, you lose yourself. The forest takes what it needs to keep balance, and those who forget that balance, they vanish." The whispering wasn't just outside anymore, it was inside me. The bow was no longer just a weapon or a tool, it was a tether, a chain binding me to something ancient, indifferent, and endlessly patient. And it wanted more. Days bled into one another like fog rolling through the pines. Each morning, I woke feeling heavier, as though something unseen weighed on my chest. The bow sat by my side like a silent sentinel, its grain pulsing faintly under my touch. Dad watched me carefully, his eyes shadowed with something between sorrow and warning. "You're changing," he said one afternoon as we stood at the range. "Not just your skill, something inside you." I wanted to argue, to tell him it was nothing, but deep down I knew. The memories I clung to, childhood laughter, my mother's smile, felt distant, as if I were watching them through cracked glass. Even my dreams twisted. The forest whispered secrets I couldn't grasp. Shadows stretched longer than they should, and a cold voice echoed, "You belong." One evening, as twilight bled into darkness, Dad confided more. "The bow demands pieces of you," he said quietly. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's love, but always it's something precious. I asked him if he had lost himself. He paused, his jaw tight. More than once, and it took years to find the pieces again. But some parts never come back. His words settled like ash in my chest. Later that night, I sat alone by the fire, the bow across my knees. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of smoke and something older, like burnt wood and forgotten prayers. The forest was watching, and I was slipping further away. The forest had always been there, a silent backdrop to our days. But now it felt alive in a way I couldn't ignore. Not just alive, watching, waiting, breathing alongside me. At the range, the usual sounds were missing. No birdsong, no rustling leaves. Only a heavy, suffocating stillness that pressed against my skin like damp cloth. When I drew the bowstring, the air seemed to thicken, as if the forest itself held its breath. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching toward me, then recoiling when I blinked. At night, the whispers grew louder, low, tangled voices curling through the trees. They weren't words I could understand, but they burrowed into my mind like needles beneath the skin. Once, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of my vision. A figure standing just beyond the tree line, impossibly still, watching. When I turned, it vanished. The bow hummed softly on my shoulder, as if alive and aware. I began to question everything. Was the forest showing me these things? Or was it something inside me, unraveling? The lines between dream and waking blurred. Sometimes I'd wake with dirt under my nails, or a faint scent of smoke on my breath, though we never lit fires. Dad remained quiet about the changes. His eyes darted to the woods more often now, lips pressed thin. I caught him murmuring old words under his breath, prayers, warnings. One evening, the forest exhaled a sudden gust, shaking branches overhead. The ground beneath us seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat syncing with my own. The whispers came again, closer this time, urgent, demanding. I realized then the bow wasn't just a tool, it was a key, and the forest wanted its doors opened. The days grew heavier, each moment thick with a quiet dread I couldn't shake. The forest around the range no longer felt like a refuge. It was a living labyrinth, folding in on itself, pressing closer with every breath I took. One morning, as pale sunlight sifted through the canopy, I stood at the edge of the clearing, the longbow in my hands trembling ever so slightly. The usual crispness of the air was gone, replaced by a damp, choking stillness. Somewhere deep in the woods, something moved, but not like any animal I'd known. The sound was too deliberate, too slow, like a measured step taken with reverence. I tried to steady my breathing, to focus on the bowstring's tension, but the forest seemed to throb with a pulse not my own. Then, through the mist, I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the line of trees, half shrouded in shadow. Its shape was impossibly tall and thin, limbs bending at odd angles that made my skin crawl. It didn't move, but I felt its gaze, cold, ancient, and somehow knowing. I blinked. The figure vanished. My heart hammered against my ribs, breath shallow and sharp. That night, sleep was elusive. When I finally drifted, my dreams were haunted by whispers, low, incomprehensible voices that wove through the branches like smoke. I saw faces in the flickering shadows, eyes wide and empty, mouths stretched in silent screams. The bow hummed against my shoulder, warm and alive. I woke gasping, the scent of burnt wood heavy in the air. Dirt and leaves clung to my hands, though I'd been lying in bed. The lines between waking and dreaming blurred. Dad sat across from me at breakfast, his face etched with exhaustion and something like fear. His hands trembled slightly as he poured coffee. "You're not the first," he said quietly. "This bond, it takes pieces from everyone it touches. The forest wants you, but it doesn't ask politely." "Why me?" I asked, voice cracking. "Why us?" He looked away, voice heavy. "Because we're tied to it, because the bow chose us, and it demands a price, not just skill, but sacrifice." I felt the weight of those words settle deep into my bones. Over the next days, reality seemed to warp. Sounds echoed where there should be silence. Shadows shifted with no light to cast them. I caught myself staring into the dark woods for minutes, feeling pulled by something unseen. Sometimes I'd find scratches on the bow that hadn't been there before, sharp, deliberate marks like ancient symbols etched in the grain. Dad's warnings grew more urgent, but his eyes betrayed his own slipping grasp on reason. One evening, as the sun bled out behind the trees, he took my hands in his. "If you lose yourself," he whispered, voice breaking, "remember who you are. The bow will ask, but never forget. You're more than what it claims." I nodded, though terror churned in my gut. That night, as the wind whispered through the pines, the forest came alive around me, watching, waiting, patient. And I realized the bond wasn't just a chain. It was a slow unraveling. The day the truth came forward, the sky hung low, drenched in a thick, pale grey, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Dad hadn't spoken much in 2 days. He barely ate. He'd begun sleeping outside near the edge of the woods, bow always within reach, muttering to himself in his sleep. That morning, I found him kneeling by the fire pit with a faded leather satchel beside him. His fingers trembled as he withdrew a bundle wrapped in oilskin, placing it in my hands with a weight that had nothing to do with its mass. "I should have told you years ago," he said, "but I thought if I carried it, it would spare you." Inside the wrap were pages, torn, yellowed, brittle at the edges. Some were old hunting logs, others were different, older, handwritten in a slanted, almost frantic script. At first I couldn't make sense of it, then the words took shape. "The forest is not haunted, it is awake. It is older than time and hungrier than God. It marks those who come with reverence and binds them to its will. Through the bow we speak to it, and it speaks back in silence." Another page, later in the bundle, chilled me to the marrow. There are those chosen not to protect the forest, but to feed it. A vessel born in blood, tethered by wood bent from the elder tree. The longbow is no tool, it is a spine. The creature's spine, still warm, still living. I recoiled instinctively. "No," I muttered, "that's not, this is just—" "I tried to burn it once," Dad said. "Years ago, right after your mother died." His voice cracked. "I thought maybe I could end it, but it wouldn't burn. The flames wouldn't touch it. And that night, I heard her voice, from the woods. A sick, cold knot formed in my stomach. You think she's—" He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "She was marked before you were born. That's why she left the bow to me. She thought if I held it, it wouldn't take you too." I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. Another page in the bundle fluttered free. This one was short. A single sentence burned into the paper in what looked like blood. "When the archer is ready, the forest will open its mouth." That night, I stood at the edge of the woods, bow in hand, breath shallow, hands shaking. And I realized the whispers were louder now, not because they were closer, but because they were inside me, calling me home. I stepped beneath the canopy alone. Dad watched from the porch, the longbow slung across my back. He didn't say goodbye. He knew better. Once the bond reached this point, there was no turning back, only forward, only deeper. The forest opened before me like a secret finally ready to be told. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. No birds, no insects, no breeze. The trees stood straighter here, older and impossibly tall. Their bark looked scorched in places, blackened like flesh seared by heat, yet they pulsed faintly as if breathing. I followed the whispers. They weren't words anymore, they were sensations. Memories, my mother's laugh, the snap of bowstring, blood on pine needles, a heartbeat beneath the soil. Then I found it. A clearing with no trees, just ash, perfectly circular. At the center, a massive root system that twisted into the ground like a spiral, surrounding a dark sinkhole, pulsing with warmth. The mouth. When the archer is ready, the longbow grew hot in my hand. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. I knocked the final arrow, when I hadn't known I'd carried, black as pitch and warm to the touch. As I drew it back, the forest inhaled, and I understood. The bow wasn't just carved from the elder tree. It was the elder tree, its limbs severed in some forgotten rite, reshaped into a tool of blood, memory, and balance. And I, marked by my mother's sacrifice and my father's silence, was the final link. The arrow flew without sound, and the forest exhaled. Light burst from the sinkhole, not blinding but golden and warm. The roots writhed and then grew still. The whispers faded, not silenced but satisfied. When I emerged, the sun was rising. Dad waited at the edge of the tree line, eyes wide, mouth trembling. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't have to. I placed the bow at his feet. No more, I said. Let it sleep, he nodded. We left it there beneath the ash, and for the first time in my life, the woods felt quiet. You made it back for now, but the things in the dark never truly leave, do they? They watch, they wait, and perhaps they remember you now too. If you want to hear more, if you dare to listen again, step back into the shadows. Like the video, subscribe, but know this, some doors once opened do not close so easily.